Hi everyone. As you might know, we don't get any sort of funding from any wealthy benefactors, academic institutions, governments, or political parties. Our work is funded by you, our listeners and readers on Patreon. In return, our supporters on Patreon get access to exclusive content and benefits like ad-free episodes, bonus podcast episodes, and 2 exclusive Patreon-only podcast series, Fireside Chats and Radical Reads. So here's a little preview of our latest Patreon-only episode. You can join us, help support our work, and listen to the full episode today at patreon.com/workingclasshistory. Link in the show notes.
As we come marching, marching in the beauty of the day, 1,000,000 darkened kitchens, 1,000 mill lofts grey are brightened by the beauty sun discloses, and the people here are singing bread and roses, bread and roses.
Most football terraces in Argentina, because they tend to be of a working class background, tend to have sympathies with what we call the campo popular, the popular camp, I guess would be the literal translation. I don't know if that means anything or the same thing in English now that I think about it, which basically would translate in practice to you'll mainly find peronistas, Peronists. Terraces in general and Racing specifically, but like most terraces, it's generally an unruly space. It's a rebellious space. It's a space where anti-police sentiment is very common. So, while it doesn't have explicit political affinities the way maybe European fan groups often do, that's very, very rare in Argentina. It tends to have that kind of character. As I was describing kind of the clubs in Argentina or their social role, that it's similar to what the Union and Working People's Association ecosystem used to be once upon a time. So this is exactly how a lot of the clubs in Argentina started. They were founded, many of them based on the immigrant ethnic collective that they revolved around, or the political affinity of the workers who founded them. So in the case of Atlanta, it's from Villa Crespo, which is a traditionally very Jewish neighborhood. So the club is associated with the Jewish community. And again, that doesn't mean that that every club member is Jewish by any means. It just means that that's just the association that it has, and that it has probably more Jewish people, Jewish identifying people than most other clubs. But that also is reflected then in the treatment that we would get from other fans, because just like in many other places in the world, anti-Semitism is a pretty virulent and widespread beast in Argentina. Argentina has one of the world's largest Jewish communities, Buenos Aires specifically. So I'm from the neighborhood of Villa Crespo, and Atlanta, the fan culture there was similar. But there you would think, okay, it's a neighborhood club. It's got this ethnic background. It'll tend to be maybe more progressive or more left wing. I thought the same thing. And I had a very unpleasant experience when I was very young. I remember going one day to an away match, and I was wearing some lefty t-shirt. I forget, but it said like Fuerza Roja, and I think it maybe had a Soviet flag on it or something. Something very anarchist, clearly. But we used it to provoke people. And I was standing against the fence behind the goal, and suddenly I hear something in Spanish, obviously, but the equivalent more or less of, what are you doing here, you piece of shit leftist? No, the first thing I hear is like, what are you doing here? And so my first thought is, I used to kind of do like stadium tourism sometimes. I'd go with my friends to other matches, if I was bored or whatever. There wasn't that, the second and third division in Argentina back then was very, very violent, pretty dangerous. So there wasn't too many people. So I was like, oh no, he recognizes me from some other stadium. He thinks I'm an infiltrator from another club or something. This is terrible. And then the next thing he says is piece of shit leftist or something political like that. I was like, what? And I turn around and I see this just humongous human being, 3 times my size, and I'm probably 15 at the time. So, and I managed to get away, extirpate myself from the situation without being beaten to a pulp or anything. And I remember, going to some of the guys from like the ultras, the older ones who knew me and who I knew, and I was like, "Hey, I just had this incident. What's going on here?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, he's one of the old Camargo skinheads. They still hang out here sometimes." Camargo is a street near it's just the name of their gang. It's a street near the stadium. And yeah, apparently there was a gang of neo-Nazi skinheads who were going to the Atlanta matches, the Jewish team in the Jewish neighborhood. So they weren't very fond of, Jewish people or leftists, apparently. So, that's not what you expect. So I ended up being exiled from the terraces for like close to a year until I was able to like reorganize things so that I could safely return, to put it that way. That has changed significantly, though. I'm not going to skip ahead, but because now La Cultura del Barrio, the anti-fascist sporting and social club, which was founded in Villa Crespo about 15 years ago, is so well implanted in the neighborhood, that's radically changed now. Like if you go to the terrace in Atlanta today, you will see many people with shirts of La Cultura del Barrio. You'll see leftist imagery. Like there isn't a collective organized presence. That would be a lie. The ultras are what they are. Politics is definitely not first on their list of concerns. But it's definitely a place where, as a leftist person, you can go openly and you are very, very unlikely to have a problem.
As mentioned previously, racing fell on hard times in the 90s and almost ceased to exist. But as Thomas explains, they were far from the only club this happened to in this period.
Atlanta, again, like Racing, had this kind of process of institutional decay, which also climaxed in a bankruptcy. And that was a microcosm of a phenomenon that you saw repeated across the smaller social clubs during the 90s in Argentina. So the 90s in Argentina, was this time of the end of history, neoliberal reform, market flexibilization. I don't know if that's a term in English. And it brought with it also just this changes kind of in social norms. And I hate to sound like an old man, maybe, but society changed, like modernity, there was video arcades to go to. There was video games you could play in your home. There was just other alternatives for young people and families or whatever of things to do. And so going to the neighborhood club just became less of the de facto activity. And again, it's kind of these vicious cycles that feed into each other. Also, families were poorer because of the reforms. We can get into the political part, I'm sure, shortly. And so some families would stop paying their club dues. You don't pay your dues, you end up not going. There was also this phenomenon of, as the clubs declined, as less and less families went, there was more of the hooligan element in the club space. So there also, as a family or as a teenager, you're like, well, the atmosphere there is not really where I want to hang out, because by the barbecue area, there's, the 60 troublemakers of the neighborhood or whatever. So there was just general spiral of decline. But it was very much symptomatic of this new vision of society where, every individual is a world upon themselves, and these kind of institutions of collective fabric, so to speak, begin to be torn apart, or their importance is diminished because they just don't represent the model of society that is being built, which is one of, everyone is an island unto themselves. And so Atlanta, just like other clubs, Comunicaciones, Español, which was, again, as the name implies, founded by the Spanish immigrant community, Comunicaciones, which I think was originally had to do with the communications union. I could be wrong, but it has had some kind of working person's roots. They all had these processes of decline and decay until they were shells of what they were. And that's when I discovered Atlanta in the mid-90s. That's what I discovered. I didn't discover a functioning neighborhood institution. I discovered a place that was falling apart, and that was basically a couple hundred hooligans going to a stadium that was literally a danger to life and limb, because it was still wooden terraces that every once in a while would give way and fall.
As we come marching, marching in the beauty of the day.
That brings us to the end of this episode preview. To listen to the full thing and help support our work researching and promoting people's history, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/workingclasshistory. Link in the show notes.